The first thing passengers noticed about Seat 8B wasn't the woman sleeping there, but the silence that followed her wherever she went. Maxine, Reaper, Thorne had purchased the entire first-class cabin on Flight 447 from Dubai to Los Angeles, not for comfort, but for the kind of peace that money couldn't usually buy. Her net worth exceeded most small nations' GDP, built from defense contracts and aerospace innovations that redefined modern warfare. But tonight, 37,000 feet above the Arabian Peninsula, she wasn't a tech mogul. She was just a woman trying to forget the sound of turbofan engines screaming through desert air. The Gulfstream G650 had been her preference for years, but commercial flights offered something her private jet couldn't: anonymity among strangers who didn't know her call sign or the missions that haunted her sleep. The flight attendant had tried twice to offer champagne, each time retreating at the sight of Maxine's thousand-yard stare. Her fingers unconsciously traced the scar running from her left temple to her jaw, a souvenir from ejecting at Mach 1.2 over hostile territory 3 years ago. What nobody aboard Flight 447 knew was that 6,000 miles away, in a classified operations center buried beneath Nellis Air Force Base, alarms were beginning to sound. Major Elena Vasquez stared at her radar screen, watching 7 unidentified aircraft penetrate restricted airspace over the Nevada test and training range. The signatures were wrong. Too fast for conventional aircraft, too large for drones, and moving in formation patterns that didn't match any known military doctrine. "Control, this is Ghostwriter 11, crackled the voice of Captain Jake Hammer Morrison through the comm system. His F-22 Raptor was 12 minutes out from intercept, but the unidentified contacts had already begun descending toward a facility that officially didn't exist. "I've got multiple unknowns, requesting permission to engage defensive posture." Major Vasquez's hand hovered over the emergency alert system. Standard protocol demanded she notify NORAD, the Pentagon, and every relevant command structure. But her gut told her this wasn't standard anything. The aircraft on her screen moved with precision that spoke of extensive reconnaissance, intimate knowledge of American air defense patterns, and technology that shouldn't exist in hostile hands. Above the Pacific, Maxine Thorne's eyes snapped open. She hadn't heard the pilot's voice over the intercom, hadn't felt the aircraft bank or climb, but something had changed in the air around her. Something that triggered instincts honed by 7 years of combat flight operations. Her phone buzzed once against her wrist. The message was 3 words from a number she'd hoped never to see again. "Reaper, we're live." The war that would reshape the balance of global power had just begun, and the world's most dangerous pilot was currently sipping lukewarm coffee at 37,000 feet, about to discover that some silences were meant to be broken. The radar signature appeared on Major Vasquez's screen like a ghost materializing from static. 7 aircraft, flying in perfect delta formation, had penetrated the most secure airspace in North America without triggering a single early warning system. Their approach vector suggested intimate knowledge of radar blind spots that took the Air Force decades to map. Worse, their flight characteristics defied conventional aerodynamics. "Ghostwriter 11 Control. Be advised, unknowns are maintaining bearing 270, altitude dropping through 18,000. IFF interrogation negative on all contacts." Major Vasquez's voice carried the controlled tension of someone watching a chess game where the opponent had just moved a piece that shouldn't exist. Her 15 years in air traffic control had never prepared her for aircraft that seemed to bend physics. Captain Morrison's F-22 Raptor cut through the Nevada sky like a predator sensing prey. His heads-up display painted the desert floor in thermal signatures while his radar struggled to maintain locks on the intruders. "Control, Ghostwriter 11. These aren't showing normal heat signatures. Engines are running too cold for conventional propulsion. Recommend we." The transmission died in static. 800 miles away, Maxine felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied incoming crisis. Her phone displayed 17 missed calls from Pentagon extensions she'd memorized, but hoped never to use again. The woman beside her stirred, glancing at the soft blue glow emanating from Maxine's device. "Business never sleeps, does it?" she murmured with the kind of sympathy reserved for fellow travelers in expensive seats. "Some kinds of business sleep permanently," Maxine replied, her finger hesitating over the callback button. 3 years of civilian life had softened the edges of her military bearing, but not the instincts. Her reflection in the cabin window showed a face that had seen too much sky from the wrong side of a canopy. The phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID read simply Zeus. General Patricia Zeus Chen, commander of Air Combat Command, didn't make social calls. She made the kind of calls that ended with people dying or being saved, depending on how quickly they answered. "Reaper," the word escaped Maxine's lips like a prayer or a curse. "We've got a situation that requires your particular expertise." Zeus's voice carried the weight of unspoken urgency. "How quickly can you get to Nellie's?" Through the cabin window, Maxine watched the sun setting over an ocean that suddenly seemed very far from the desert where her old life waited. The passengers around her continued their peaceful journey toward Los Angeles, unaware that the woman in 8B was calculating flight times, fuel loads, and the probability that she'd see another sunset. "I'm 40 minutes out from Lax," she said finally. "But Zeus, I'm retired." "Retirement's a luxury we can't afford tonight, Reaper. The sky's about to fall, and you're the only pilot crazy enough to catch it." The radar contact that had been designated Unknown One suddenly accelerated, beyond anything Major Vasquez had witnessed in her career. The blip on her screen transitioned from aircraft to missile signature in seconds, streaking toward a classified facility with the precision of guided munition. Her training kicked in before conscious thought could interfere. "All stations, control. We have confirmed hostile action. Repeat, confirmed hostile action. Unknown One has engaged weapons-free posture against Installation 77 Alpha." The words felt surreal leaving her mouth. Installation 77 Alpha housed experimental aircraft that represented decades of black project development, including prototype engines that made current stealth technology look like paper airplanes. If those designs fell into hostile hands, the technological advantage that kept America's enemies at bay would evaporate overnight. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through static that seemed to intensify with each transmission. "Control, I'm showing multiple launch signatures. Whatever these things are, they're not here for reconnaissance." His F-22's weapon systems had achieved lock on 3 separate targets, but something about their movement patterns triggered every survival instinct he developed over 8 years of combat operations. The first explosion lit the Nevada desert like a miniature sunrise. Installation 77 Alpha's primary research hangar erupted in flames that could be seen from orbit, taking with it aircraft that existed only in the dreams of aerospace engineers and the nightmares of enemy intelligence services. But the attackers hadn't finished their business. Maxine's commercial flight was beginning its descent toward Los Angeles when her phone exploded with incoming messages. Satellite imagery, classified briefings, and tactical assessments flooded her secure communication app with the kind of information that typically preceded world wars. Her fingers moved across the screen with muscle memory that belonged to a different version of herself. The aircraft attacking Nellie's weren't just advanced, they were revolutionary. Propulsion systems that generated minimal heat signature, stealth capabilities that made current radar technology obsolete, and maneuverability that suggested either breakthrough materials science or complete abandonment of human safety factors. Whoever was flying these missions was either expendable or not human. "Ma'am, we're beginning our final approach," the flight attendant announced, her professional smile unable to mask concern about the passenger in 8B who'd spent the last 20 minutes staring at her phone with the intensity of someone watching a live execution. Maxine looked up from footage of burning aircraft hangars. "I need to speak with the captain, immediately." "I'm sorry, but regulations don't permit." "Tell him that Reaper needs emergency priority landing at a military airfield, and that the authorization is coming from Zeus herself." Maxine's voice carried the kind of authority that made people move without questioning the logic behind the movement. Minutes later, Flight 447 was vectoring toward Edwards Air Force Base, while Maxine calculated how many people would die if she was too late to matter. Edwards Air Force Base materialized from the California desert like a mirage of concrete and purpose. Flight 447 touched down on runway 22L with the kind of precision that spoke to pilots who understood the difference between commercial convenience and military necessity. Maxine was moving toward the exit before the aircraft finished taxiing, her civilian clothes feeling like costume jewelry compared to the flight suit she'd worn for 7 years. The woman waiting at the bottom of the aircraft steps wore Colonel's eagles and the kind of expression that preceded very bad news. "Ms. Thorne, Colonel Sarah Martinez, base commander, we've got transport standing by." "It's Major Thorne and the situation report, Colonel." "How bad is it?" Maxine's civilian identity peeled away like old paint as she fell into step beside Martinez. The base around them hummed with activity that spoke to elevated alert status and the kind of tension that preceded shooting wars. 3 installations hit simultaneously: Nellis, Wright-Patterson, and Groom Lake. Advanced aircraft, unknown propulsion systems, precision strikes on our most classified programs. We've lost 70 years of technological advantage in the last 4 hours. Martinez's voice carried the flat delivery of someone reporting a disaster too large for emotional processing. The Black Hawk helicopter waiting on the tarmac represented the difference between civilian transportation and military urgency. Maxine strapped herself into the crew chief's position with movements that belonged to muscle memory from another lifetime. Through the aircraft's windows, she watched California scroll past like a map of someone else's peaceful existence. "Casualties?" she asked, adjusting her headset to cut through the rotor noise. Surprisingly minimal. These weren't terror attacks designed for maximum human cost. They were surgical strikes aimed at specific technological assets. Whoever planned this knew exactly what they wanted to destroy. The helicopter banked toward Nevada, carrying Maxine back toward the desert where her reputation had been forged in combat that officially never happened. She'd flown missions over countries that didn't appear on maps, engaged enemies that existed only in classified briefings, and returned home to a civilian world that would never understand the prices paid for their peaceful sleep. Her reflection in the helicopter's window showed a face that was remembering how to be dangerous. 3 years of boardrooms and profit margins hadn't erased the woman who'd earned the call sign, Reaper, by bringing death to America's enemies with surgical precision. But tonight, she wondered if precision would be enough. The desert floor rushed past below them, painted silver by starlight that had witnessed humanity's first attempts at flight and would probably witness their last. Somewhere ahead, in the burning remains of Installation 77 Alpha, lay evidence of technology that could reshape the balance of global power. The question wasn't whether America could recover from these losses. It was whether they could survive what came next. Nellis Air Force Base emerged from the darkness like a wounded giant, its runways scarred by impact craters, and its hangars reduced to skeletal frames that reached toward an indifferent sky. The helicopter's landing lights swept across debris fields where cutting-edge aircraft had been transformed into expensive scrap metal by weapons that shouldn't have existed in hostile hands. Major Vasquez met them at the landing pad, her face carrying the shell-shocked expression of someone who'd watched the impossible happen in real time. "Major Thorne, I've been monitoring the situation since initial contact. What we saw tonight, it changes everything." Maxine stepped down from the helicopter into air that tasted of aviation fuel and burned dreams. The base around them looked like the aftermath of a precision bombing campaign designed by someone with intimate knowledge of American military capabilities. "Show me the tactical data, Major." "Everything." The operations center had been converted into a war room where exhausted intelligence analysts stared at screens full of data that defied rational explanation. Satellite imagery showed the attack patterns with crystalline clarity. 7 aircraft had approached from different vectors, executed coordinated strikes on specific targets, and vanished from radar coverage with the efficiency of ghosts returning to whatever dimension spawned them. "The propulsion signatures don't match anything in our database," reported Captain Lisa Viper Thompson, her fighter pilot instincts struggling to process aircraft that moved like nothing she'd ever encountered. "Heat signatures suggest engine technology at least 20 years ahead of our current capabilities." Maxine studied the radar tracks with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient's vital signs. The attack pattern spoke to planning that required months of intelligence gathering and technological capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about global military balance. These aren't foreign military assets. This level of coordination suggests something else entirely. General Chen's voice crackled through the secure communication system with the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years turning impossible situations into American victories. "Reaper, we need you airborne within the hour. Intel suggests this was a probe, not the main event. Whatever's coming next, we need our best pilot evaluating their capabilities firsthand." The hangar that housed Maxine's assigned aircraft stood like a cathedral dedicated to the religion of controlled violence. The A-10 Thunderbolt II waiting inside represented 3 decades of close air support evolution. Its titanium bathtub cockpit and redundant systems designed to keep pilots alive in environments where survival was a statistical improbability. But tonight, it also represented something more personal, the bridge between who Maxine had been and who she needed to become. The crew chief, a 30-year veteran named Sergeant Rodriguez, approached with the kind of respect reserved for pilots whose reputations preceded them like advance artillery. "She's fueled and armed, Major. Maverick missiles, Hydra rockets, and enough 30mm ammunition to level a small city." Maxine ran her hands along the aircraft's scarred fuselage, feeling the familiar texture of metal that had survived more combat than most pilots would see in 10 lifetimes. The A-10 wasn't fast or pretty, but it was honest in the way that only weapons of war could be honest. It promised to bring its pilot home or die trying, and after 3 years of civilian compromise, that kind of reliability felt like salvation. The pre-flight inspection revealed an aircraft maintained with the obsessive care that kept combat pilots breathing. Every system checked nominal, every weapon verified, every backup system tested and retested by ground crews who understood that mechanical failure in combat wasn't inconvenience. It was death sentence delivered with bureaucratic efficiency. As Maxine strapped herself into the cockpit, the familiar embrace of ejection seat and flight controls felt like returning to a home she'd never really left. The instrument panel glowed with the soft luminescence of technology designed to function in the electromagnetic chaos of modern warfare, each gauge and display representing decades of engineering devoted to keeping American pilots alive in hostile skies. The tower's clearance came through her headset with the crisp professionalism of controllers who'd spent the night watching their base burn. "Reaper 1, cleared for takeoff runway 27, wind 260 at 12, altimeter 2992. Expect vectors upon departure for reconnaissance flight, unknown duration." Maxine advanced the throttles and felt 10 tons of American engineering respond with the kind of power that made dictators nervous. The A-10's twin General Electric turbofan spooled up with the distinctive whine that had become the last sound many of America's enemies ever heard. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, she felt the familiar transformation that occurred when pilots stopped being people and became systems of controlled destruction. Rotation speed came with the inevitability of physics, and suddenly, Maxine was airborne over a desert that held more secrets than most nations possessed. The burning installations fell away below her as she climbed toward stars that had witnessed every human conflict since the species learned to kill each other efficiently. Tonight, they would witness something new. The high desert air felt different at 12,000 feet, thinner and cleaner than the atmosphere that humans preferred for their breathing and their politics. Maxine's heads-up display painted the Nevada landscape in the green phosphorescence of night vision technology, transforming the familiar terrain into something alien and hostile. Each mountain peak and valley floor represented potential cover for enemies who'd already demonstrated technological superiority that challenged American air supremacy. Reaper 1, Control. Vector 280, maintain current altitude. We're showing multiple radar contacts bearing 150, approximately 40 miles out. Approach with extreme caution. Major Vasquez's voice carried the tension of someone watching a chess game where the opponent had already demonstrated mastery of moves that weren't supposed to exist. The A-10's radar was designed for close air support, not air-to-air combat, but it painted the approaching contacts with enough clarity to confirm fears that had been building since the first mysterious aircraft appeared on scope. 7 blips moved in formation that spoke to coordination beyond human reaction times, their flight patterns suggesting either extensively trained pilots or flight control systems that eliminated human limitations entirely. Maxine's hands found the weapon selection switches with muscle memory that belonged to a different version of herself. The Maverick missiles hanging beneath her wings represented American aerospace engineering at its most lethal, each warhead capable of destroying main battle tanks or reducing aircraft hangars to rubble. But against enemies who demonstrated technology decades ahead of current capabilities, conventional weapons felt like bringing knives to gunfights. Control, Reaper 1. I'm showing multiple contacts, but their heat signatures are all wrong. These engines aren't generating normal propulsion thermal patterns. Her voice carried the controlled tension of someone whose survival instincts were screaming warnings that her rational mind couldn't yet process. The first contact resolved on her display like a nightmare materializing from smoke. The aircraft approaching from the southeast moved with angular precision that suggested stealth capabilities far beyond current American technology. Its profile resembled nothing in any recognition manual, combining swept wings with fuselage geometry that seemed to bend light around itself. At 8 miles, the bogie began to accelerate beyond anything Maxine had encountered in 7 years of combat operations. Her airspeed indicator showed 400 knots, while the unknown aircraft pulled away like she was standing still. The technological implications hit her like physical blows. Propulsion systems that made American engines look primitive, material science that enabled aerodynamics previously limited to theoretical models, and flight characteristics that suggested either breakthrough engineering or complete abandonment of human pilot limitations. Reaper 1, be advised, we're tracking 6 additional contacts. They appear to be surrounding your position. Major Vasquez's voice had acquired the flat delivery that preceded very bad situations becoming worse. Maxine checked her defensive systems while calculating engagement parameters that belonged to scenarios she'd hoped never to encounter. The chaff and flare dispensers showed full loads, her electronic countermeasures were active, and the 30mm cannon was loaded with depleted uranium rounds designed to penetrate armored targets. But against technology that challenged fundamental assumptions about air combat, preparation felt like superstition. The desert floor rushed past 8,000 feet below as 7 unknown aircraft began what looked like a coordinated intercept pattern. Maxine's training kicked in before conscious thought could interfere, transforming her from retired CEO into the weapon system that had earned the call sign Reaper through precision application of controlled violence. The lead bogey was closing at a rate that suggested either suicidal intent or confidence in technological superiority that made human survival concerns irrelevant. Maxine armed her missiles and prepared to discover which assumption was correct. The first missile launch came without warning, appearing on Maxine's threat display like a digital death sentence materializing from electronic noise. The bogey had fired from beyond visual range, using guidance systems that locked onto her A-10 despite active jamming and countermeasures that should have rendered targeting impossible. Her defensive system screamed warnings in multiple frequencies, while her hands moved across the cockpit controls with practiced efficiency. Missile inbound, Reaper 1 is defending. Her voice carried the controlled urgency of someone whose survival depended on precise execution of procedures learned through repetition that bordered on religious devotion. The chaff and flare dispensers erupted in electromagnetic and thermal signatures designed to confuse incoming weapons, filling the desert sky with false targets that had saved thousands of American pilots over 5 decades of technological evolution. The missile passed within 50 feet of her aircraft, close enough to feel the pressure wave through the A-10's armored structure. But instead of detonating, it continued past her position and disappeared into the darkness like a warning shot fired by enemies who wanted to demonstrate capability without committing to destruction. The implications chilled her more than outright attack would have. Control Reaper 1. Inbound missile did not detonate. Repeat, hostile weapon did not engage despite optimal firing solution. These aren't combat operations, they're technology demonstrations. Major Vasquez's response crackled through static that seemed to intensify with each hostile action. Reaper 1, recommend immediate return to base. We're showing additional radar contacts inbound from multiple vectors. This situation is escalating beyond single aircraft engagement parameters. But Maxine was already moving toward the lead bogey, with the kind of aggressive tactics that had earned her reputation in combat zones, where American pilots learned to kill, or be killed with equal efficiency. The A-10 wasn't designed for air-to-air combat, but she'd modified standard procedures through 7 years of missions that officially didn't exist, developing techniques for using close air support aircraft in roles that challenged conventional doctrine. The Maverick missile left her wing with the distinctive roar of solid fuel propellant, converting chemical energy into kinetic destruction. The weapon's infrared seeker acquired the bogey's minimal heat signature and began terminal guidance toward a target that represented technological capabilities America couldn't afford to let escape intact. At 2 miles from impact, the hostile aircraft simply vanished. Not destroyed, not exploded, not crashed, vanished like it had never existed except as phosphorescent traces on radar screens, and the testimony of pilots whose credibility would be questioned for decades. Maxine's missile continued toward empty air before self-destructing in accordance with safety protocols, designed to prevent ordnance from landing on friendly territory. Control Reaper 1. Target has disappeared from all sensors. No debris, no explosion signature, no radar contact. It's like the aircraft was never there. The remaining 6 bogies began accelerating away from her position with coordination that spoke to instantaneous communication and reaction times that eliminated human limitations. Within 30 seconds, her radar screen showed empty sky, where moments before 7 unknown aircraft had demonstrated technological superiority that rendered American air defenses obsolete. The desert below looked peaceful in the starlight, giving no indication that it had just witnessed a confrontation that would reshape global military balance. Maxine flew her patrol pattern over burning installations, while calculating the implications of enemies who could appear and disappear at will, engage American forces with impunity, and demonstrate technological capabilities that belong to science fiction rather than contemporary warfare. Her radio crackled with reports from other interceptors who'd experienced similar encounters. Missiles that didn't explode, aircraft that vanished without trace, and technology demonstrations that felt more like psychological warfare than conventional combat. America's enemies had just announced that the rules had changed, and the announcement had been delivered with surgical precision that left no doubt about their technological advantage. The flight back to Nellie's felt like returning from a different war in a different century, carrying intelligence about enemies who'd evolved beyond American capabilities to counter or even comprehend. As the base's runway lights appeared through her windscreen, Maxine realized that her retirement had ended not with a return to familiar warfare, but with introduction to conflict that would require reimagining everything she thought she knew about air combat. The hangar bay doors opened like metal jaws, swallowing an aircraft that had witnessed impossible things. Ground crews swarmed over the A-10, with the efficiency of mechanics who understood that every component might contain evidence of technology that could shift global power balance. Maxine sat in her cockpit for several minutes after engines shut down, processing an encounter that challenged fundamental assumptions about American military superiority. Debriefing sessions typically involved routine questions about aircraft performance and enemy capabilities. Tonight, the assembled intelligence officers looked like anthropologists trying to understand artifacts from a civilization that shouldn't exist. The conference room filled with tablet computers, satellite phones, and the kind of classified documentation that preceded policy changes measured in decades rather than years. Major Thorne, let's start with the missile engagement, began Colonel James Torch Williams, whose 30 years in intelligence had taught him to distinguish between pilot error and paradigm shifts that redefined modern warfare. You're certain the hostile weapon achieved optimal firing solution before passing your aircraft without detonating. Maxine studied the tactical display showing her flight path overlaid with radar data that confirmed what she'd experienced firsthand. The missile passed within 50 feet of my aircraft's center mass. At that range, proximity fusing should have guaranteed detonation regardless of direct impact. The weapon chose not to engage. The implications hung in the air like smoke from burning aircraft. Enemy technology that could demonstrate lethal capability while choosing restraint suggested either psychological warfare designed to demoralize American forces or confidence in technological superiority that made human casualties irrelevant to strategic objectives. Dr. Elizabeth Phoenix Carter, the base's senior aerospace engineer, leaned forward with the intensity of someone whose theoretical knowledge was being challenged by empirical data. The propulsion signatures we recorded don't match any known engine technology. Heat output suggests power plants operating at efficiency levels that challenge our understanding of thermodynamics. The radar footage played in slow motion, showing aircraft that moved like they were exempt from physics that governed conventional flight. Acceleration patterns suggested either revolutionary propulsion systems or materials science that enabled structural integrity beyond anything in American inventory. The technology gap wasn't years or decades. It represented fundamental breakthroughs in multiple scientific disciplines. General Chen's voice joined the conversation through encrypted communication links that connected Nellies to the Pentagon, NORAD, and command structures that would decide America's response to enemies who'd announced their technological superiority through precision demonstration. Reaper, we need your assessment. Are we looking at foreign military assets or something else entirely? Maxine considered the question while studying footage of aircraft that challenged everything she understood about aerodynamics and warfare. Ma'am, the coordination patterns suggest extensive training and technological integration beyond current human capabilities. These weren't experimental aircraft being tested. They were operational systems being demonstrated by pilots or control systems that don't operate within human limitations. The silence that followed her assessment carried the weight of implications that would reshape American defense policy for generations. If enemies possessed technology that rendered current military capabilities obsolete, every assumption about global power balance required reevaluation. The burning installations outside the conference room represented more than damaged facilities. They marked the end of American technological supremacy. Through the windows, dawn was beginning to paint the desert in colors that had witnessed the birth of American air power. But this morning brought light to a world where those accomplishments might prove insufficient against enemies who'd learned to make aircraft disappear like magic tricks performed with technology that shouldn't exist. The secure conference room at Nellis Air Force Base had been designed to contain discussions that could reshape global politics. This morning, it held conversations that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality itself. The assembled intelligence officers, aerospace engineers, and combat pilots represented decades of experience that suddenly felt inadequate against enemies who demonstrated mastery of technology that belonged in theoretical journals rather than combat zones. "We've confirmed similar encounters at Wright-Patterson and Groom Lake," reported Colonel Martinez, her voice carrying the flat delivery of someone summarizing disasters too large for emotional processing. 14 aircraft total, all demonstrating identical capabilities. Stealth that renders radar detection sporadic at best, propulsion systems that generate minimal heat signatures, and the ability to simply vanish from all sensors. Dr. Carter pulled up holographic displays that transformed the conference room into a three-dimensional representation of the previous night's encounters. The aircraft moved through virtual airspace with precision that spoke to coordination beyond human reaction times, their flight patterns suggesting either extensively networked flight control systems or pilots whose capabilities exceeded biological limitations. The materials analysis from debris recovered at Installation 77 Alpha shows metal alloys that we can't identify using conventional spectroscopy, she continued, her academic demeanor struggling to process data that challenged established scientific principles. Molecular structures suggest manufacturing techniques that operate at atomic levels with precision we haven't achieved in laboratory settings. Maxine studied the debris patterns while calculating implications that extended far beyond military applications. Technology capable of manipulating matter at atomic levels would revolutionize everything from electronics to medicine to space exploration. Enemies who possessed such capabilities weren't just militarily superior. They were technologically evolved beyond American capacity to understand or counter. General Chen's image appeared on the main display screen, her expression carrying the weight of decisions that would define American strategy for decades. "The President has authorized Operation Silent Sky. We're implementing comprehensive air defense modifications and accelerating development of next-generation interceptor aircraft. But in the meantime, we need intelligence on enemy capabilities that goes beyond last night's demonstrations." The mission parameters appeared on secondary screens with the kind of classification levels that preceded operations requiring congressional notification. Maxine would lead a reconnaissance flight designed to locate and observe enemy aircraft using stealth technology that might enable close-range intelligence gathering without triggering defensive responses. "Ma'am, if these aircraft can vanish at will, proximity reconnaissance becomes survival gambling with odds that favor the House," Maxine observed, her combat experience calculating scenarios where American advantages became irrelevant against technologically superior enemies. "Which is why we're sending our best pilot in our most survivable aircraft," Zeus replied. "The A-10 was designed to absorb punishment that would destroy other fighters. If anyone can get close enough for meaningful intelligence gathering, it's the pilot who earned the call sign Reaper through 7 years of impossible missions." The compliment carried weight that transcended military courtesy. General Chen didn't distribute praise casually, and her confidence in Maxine's capabilities represented professional assessment rather than motivational speaking. But confidence wouldn't neutralize enemy technology that had already demonstrated superiority over American air defenses. The mission briefing continued with tactical parameters that felt like planning expeditions to alien worlds rather than reconnaissance flights over familiar territory. Enemy aircraft had been detected approaching from directions that suggested launch points beyond conventional aircraft range, using flight paths that avoided established radar coverage with precision that indicated extensive intelligence preparation. As the sun climbed higher over Nevada desert that held more secrets than most nations possessed, Maxine prepared for a mission that would either provide intelligence crucial to American survival or demonstrate the futility of challenging enemies who'd evolved beyond human capacity to understand or defeat. The modified A-10 waiting in Hangar Bay 7 represented 3 years of black project development that had transformed close air support aircraft into reconnaissance platforms capable of operations that challenged conventional tactical doctrine. Advanced sensors, upgraded electronic warfare systems, and stealth modifications that reduced radar signature without compromising the aircraft's legendary survivability. Sergeant Rodriguez approached with the reverent demeanor of ground crew who understood they were preparing aircraft for missions that would either make history or become classified footnotes in documents future generations would never read. She's loaded with extended-range fuel tanks and reconnaissance pods instead of conventional ordnance. Major. Flight duration approximately 4 hours depending on altitude and throttle settings. Maxine examined the sensor package with appreciation for engineering that pushed technological boundaries without sacrificing reliability. The cameras could resolve individual faces from 20 miles. The electronic intelligence gathering systems could intercept communications across multiple frequency spectrums. And the threat detection equipment could identify hostile weapon systems before they achieved firing solutions. But technology couldn't eliminate the fundamental challenge of reconnaissance missions against enemies who demonstrated ability to appear and disappear at will. If enemy aircraft could vanish from radar detection, close-range observation became exercises in controlled collision that favored opponents with superior maneuverability and weapons systems. The pre-flight inspection revealed modifications that transformed familiar aircraft into something designed for warfare that hadn't existed when the A-10 first flew combat missions. Stealth coatings, advanced communication systems, and defensive countermeasures that represented decades of technological evolution applied to airframe design that prioritized survival over speed or maneuverability. As Maxine strapped herself into the cockpit, the morning sun painted the Nevada landscape in colors that had witnessed every major advance in American aviation. From the first jet engines to stealth technology that redefined air warfare, this desert had harbored projects that kept America's enemies awake at night, wondering what innovations were being tested beyond their intelligence capabilities. The tower's clearance came with coordinates that appeared on no civilian charts, directing her toward airspace where experimental aircraft tested technologies that wouldn't enter production for decades. Reaper 1, cleared for departure. Vector 210, maintain Angels 20, expect contact with sentry control upon reaching station. The A-10's engine spooled up with familiar reliability, transforming chemical energy into kinetic motion that lifted 10 tons of American engineering toward a sky that no longer belonged exclusively to friendly forces. As the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, Maxine felt the transformation that occurred when pilots stopped being people and became systems designed for gathering intelligence that could preserve or doom civilizations. The desert floor fell away below her like a topographic map of human ambition, each installation and test site representing decades of research, designed to maintain technological advantages that enemies had apparently overcome through breakthroughs that challenged established scientific principles. Today's mission would determine whether American innovation could adapt quickly enough to survive encounters with technology that belonged to different eras of human development. At 20,000 feet, the curvature of Earth became visible through cockpit windows that framed a world suddenly much larger and more dangerous than the one she'd known as a civilian CEO. The enemy was out there somewhere, possessing capabilities that rendered American military superiority irrelevant and intentions that remained as mysterious as their technology. The reconnaissance zone stretched across Nevada airspace that had witnessed more classified flights than most pilots would log in entire careers. Maxine established patrol patterns designed to maximize sensor coverage while maintaining escape routes toward friendly territory. But escape planning felt optimistic against enemies who could outrun anything America could launch in pursuit. Her first contact appeared on radar at 9:47 hours, bearing northwest at extreme range. The signature resembled previous encounters, but with subtle differences that suggested either technological improvements or different aircraft variants designed for specific mission profiles. As the bogey approached within sensor range, Maxine began gathering intelligence that would either provide crucial insights into enemy capabilities or document American technological inferiority with scientific precision. The aircraft that materialized on her sensors defied every assumption about aerodynamics and propulsion that had governed combat aviation, since humans first learned to kill each other efficiently from altitude. Its profile combined angular stealth geometry with curves that seemed to bend light around structural surfaces, creating visual effects that challenged perception trained by decades of conventional aircraft recognition. Control, Reaper 1. I have visual on unknown aircraft, bearing 310, range approximately 8 miles, beginning sensor collection. Maxine's voice carried the controlled professionalism of someone documenting phenomena that would reshape military aviation for generations. The enemy aircraft moved with precision that suggested either computer-controlled flight systems or pilots whose reaction times exceeded human biological limitations. Course corrections occurred without the gradual adjustments that characterized human-operated aircraft, transitions happening instantaneously, as if the machine anticipated rather than responded to navigation inputs. Her electronic intelligence systems began intercepting communications that defied conventional radio protocols. The data streams resembled digital transmissions, but operated across frequency spectrums that suggested communication technologies decades beyond current American capabilities. The encryption, if it was encryption, showed mathematical complexity that would require quantum computing resources to penetrate.